Variant Dungeons, Criterion Dungeons, and straight up ass Savage. Today, we're going to be talking about one of my most anticipated features for Final Fantasy XIV, and now that it's finally been implemented into the game, how do I feel about it? Well, it's not exactly what I wanted. And having said that, I understand that this bears a bit of a negative connotation. That's not really the intention behind that sentence. It's not really what I wanted, but that doesn't mean that I don't like it, if that makes sense. So first, let's establish what are Variant, Criterion, and, Criterion Savage, I guess. I just call it Ass because it's another Sildine subterranean, so people have been calling it Ass Savage, which is pretty cool. Anyway, so the Variant Dungeons is basically a one dungeon, but you can take different routes throughout the dungeon. And as you take each of these different routes, you unravel more and more of the story of the dungeon. Now, I greatly appreciate this because this is a type of dungeon that can be done either alone or with a different group of friends. You don't necessarily need to have 4 people. You can come in here with 2 of your friends, which I personally think is really cool, even though it is very much another piece of casual content, which, I'm looking for something a little bit more challenging, and we'll talk about that because this does provide that. But the aspect of the Variant Dungeons is really cool because it provides you with a lot of replayability. As a matter of fact, the Variant Dungeons is probably what you're going to be watching as gameplay footage throughout this video, even though I will also show you the Criterion Dungeon. We'll talk more about that as well. But in the Variant Dungeon, basically there's a combined total of 12 routes that you can have throughout the dungeon. Even though some of these routes have very minor changes, so it'll be like one route, but instead of you doing, instead of you turning a lever left, you turn it right, and suddenly things are a little bit different. So it's kind of like small variations like that. There's like 3 main branching paths, but I suspect that there's more to it than that because, again, up until this point, I haven't really unlocked everything of the Variant Dungeons. And the reasoning is, I understand that there's already guides out there that explain to you all the different variations of the Variant Dungeon, but fundamentally, it's kind of like the same thing that I said about the island, which is a lot of people basically optimize the fun out of it. To me, the fun of the Variant Dungeons is discovering these routes for myself, organically solving the puzzles and doing all of these things, which I have been doing organically as I've been going through these dungeons. Like I don't know if I've said how many I've completed so far, but up until this point, I've completed 6 of the different routes, and I'm going to continue to explore, and maybe I'm going to mess up somewhere along the way. Up until this point, I've been able to do 6 completely different routes, which is cool. But, at some point, I'm going to have to start repeating them in order to explore and figure out where the types of things that I need to experiment with. I already have a couple of ideas about things that I can try to see if they'll give me access to different routes, secret bosses, and stuff like that. Which is, again, it's a lot of fun doing this exploration stuff for the Variant Dungeons. And the reward for doing the Variant Dungeons, I feel like, is somewhat appropriate. I would have liked to seen some gear, but fundamentally, doing this activity gives you tomestones, which does give you access to radiant gear and stuff like that. So you can do this instead of farming your experts and stuff like that. Even though experts give you a lot more tomestones of what are they called now? Causality. They give you a lot more tomestones of causality than necessarily just doing this. But this is also, something that you can do solo at your own pace, or you can bring a friend and whatever. It's fun. It also gives you the other tokens of astronomy, which is the stuff that you need for the Manderville relic weapons. So it's not like doing the Variant Dungeon is useless, but it also has a unique reward, which is the, what do they call it? The Noir set, which is like a big trench coat type deal, like hard-boiled detective type clothing. I'm going to try to show a little bit of footage of that as well. But, those are kind of like the main rewards for doing this. And then we have the Criterion Dungeon. So the Criterion Dungeon is what you get when you turn up the difficulty of this all the way up into extreme. And it is a lot different than what I expected. So when you're talking about a Savage dungeon, my interpretation would be, okay, this is going to be a dungeon. But in reality, this is not really a dungeon type experience. I find it to be more so like an alliance raid, if that makes sense. Now, for some people, it's not going to make a lot of sense. But basically, each of the bosses in this dungeon is more so of a 4-man raid encounter. than necessarily like a dungeon. Now, it is important for everybody to understand that I already have a preconceived notion of what I wanted this system to be, and people that maybe never played World of Warcraft don't really have a notion of what that system is, even though I bring it up quite often. But what I was hoping for was something in vain with Mythic Plus. Now, I understood from the moment that it was announced that this was not going to be a Mythic Plus-like experience because it was only going to have 3 difficulties. I was well aware of this, and whereas Mythic Plus, for those of you that don't know, is basically permanently increasing in difficulty in a dungeon. So you started at like +0, then you get a key, and then you get to +1, +2, +3, and you can keep escalating the difficulty of the dungeon. And you'll also keep getting loot drops and stuff like that. So when you're talking about the Criterion Dungeon, it's like the extreme version of this dungeon. Now, whereas in Variant, you have a choice as to the route that you take when it comes to Criterion, there's no such choice. You have a preset route, and you're going to go through, I believe, 3 bosses. I don't know if it's 2 bosses or if it's 3 bosses, because we haven't finished the Criterion Dungeon yet up until this point. And unfortunately, one of the people that I play with a lot, he's taking a vacation, Q's taking a vacation, so we only did the first boss in Criterion so far. As a matter of fact, I'll show you guys some footage of the first boss of Criterion. And we defeated it. Took us quite a few hours because it was also like a bad day for most of us because we had to do like work and stuff, and I also had to like pick up my kids, take him to a tutor that he goes to after school. Like it was basically a mess for us to get together and even do this content. So it's hard, and then one of them left, and so now we're left with only 3 people. So therefore, it becomes a little bit harder to attempt this content more often because people's schedules just aren't aligning. But either way, all of us greatly enjoyed the experience. But again, what I wanted was something more akin to Mythic Plus, and what I got is, like I said, an extreme version of an allied raid for 4 people. And so, what are the problems with this? There's no real problems with the content itself. One of the things, if I had some criticism to point out, is the fact that after you beat the first boss, there's no reward. Which, considering that this is basically a raid encounter, I would basically compare this to a regular extreme. Like, it took us a couple of hours to figure out the strategy. But that's also because we didn't do variant dungeons before. We only did like 1 run of a variant dungeon to unlock the Criterion and went straight into Criterion. Whereas if you do variant dungeons, you get to experience the mechanics of each of the bosses in the Criterion in a much more controlled environment, which makes, understanding how these mechanics work a lot easier. Whereas we just jumped into Criterion and just like bashed our face into it until we understood how things actually worked. To each their own and all that, but it was a really fun romp, but we were all very surprised when we get there and we actually defeat the rat, and it's just like, there's no reward. Okay, so basically you're gonna have to defeat all of these raid bosses in succession in order to actually achieve a reward, which I'm not complaining about it. I was just thinking that, in my opinion, I think it would be better to have like checkpoints along the way so that you'd get some reward for the amount of effort that you've put in. But you don't have to do that. Like I said, up until this point, I only very briefly touched up on Criterion. Now, even the trash itself is a bit of a puzzle. Now, the starting trash is fairly easy. You pull one mob, kill it, pull another mob, kill it. You can probably pull both of the mobs and kill them, I would assume, maybe, depending on how capable your group is. And then you clear the sides, and then you go straight into the boss. But the second trash was much more interesting because there's like this almost like a maze type arrangement of structures, and then they're constantly patrolling, so you have to tank it and move it away from other mobs in order to isolate them and destroy this trash one by one, which I thought was really cool because it really plays into aspects that you don't see in normal dungeons. Like in a normal dungeon, what do? Wall to wall, grab everything, murder everything in a couple of seconds, and then wall to wall, grab everything, murder everything, and then boss, and then repeat 3 times. 2 more times after that one, right? So it's not really like a particularly engaging scenario in expert dungeon stuff like that. You just do them because, you get rewards, and the first time around it's fun to see the dungeon, see the bosses, and all of that jazz. Now in Criterion, I really appreciated the fact that as a tank, it much more tested my situational awareness, whereas like, oh, I got to be aware there's a mob over there, there's a mob over there, and I got to make sure that when I pull this mob and when we start this engagement, that I'm going to be able to continuously navigate this mob through the maze as we are killing it to prevent us ninja pulling other mobs. And that is something that I friggin' love. So that was fantastic. I love that part. Then we got to the second boss and we got decimated, and then we kind of like had to go. But again, I love the experience, but if there's one thing this taught me, and I can't really talk too much about the Savage version because I haven't seen it yet, but if there's one thing that this has taught me is that most likely in Final Fantasy XIV, we're never really going to see a Mythic Plus type experience because Creative Business Unit 3 does not want to tamper too much with their gearing experience of players, which I understand because, you know, I love the way that you can gear your character in Final Fantasy XIV because you can get to a point where, hey, I got all my gear, I'm pretty much set. Next thing I got to do is just do the raid until I get the, you know, the next piece of gear or whatever, until I complete the tier, and then I have all of this other stuff. Like, I love that. Don't get me wrong. But there's just something in me that loves Mythic Plus and World of Warcraft. And I just think that that is going to be an experience that I'm not going to be able to have in another video game. Because it definitely seems like this is not what Square Enix wants to do. I was wondering what the rewards were going to be for Criterion and Savage. I was wondering if it could have been like kind of a side grade, maybe a step in between from Extreme and Savage. I don't know exactly what I was expecting, but I was expecting some type of like gear progression there. But that's not going to be the route that they're going to take. They're giving you these coins, which give you access to like a couple of cosmetic things like a throne mount of some kind that I haven't even seen. There's probably a screenshot somewhere. I'll try to put it on the video. It gives you access also to an orchestrion role, and I don't even know what the other thing is, but it's basically a bunch of stuff that not a whole lot of people care about, from what I can tell, because there's been a lot of people saying that the rewards are inadequate. I'm not saying the rewards are inadequate because to me, the challenge in of itself is kind of like the reward. Engaging in the content, that's the fun part. Like I said, we killed the mouse. We got nothing for it, but it's not like we were mad. We kind of expected to get something for it, but we weren't mad. We're just like, oh, this was really fun. Let's do more. The problem is that fundamentally, you know, when we actually start engaging in it hardcore, when people aren't on vacations and too busy and whatnot, and we just go in there, start clearing out the entirety of Criterion, clear out the entirety of the Savage version of it, we're just going to be done. Like, that's it. And see, that's the point of Mythic Plus. It keeps evolving and evolving, and it's like a treadmill. And I know that that's not going to be for everyone, and, you know, maybe they're just like testing the waters with this. Maybe they're planning on iterating on it. But most definitely, I don't think I'm getting the Mythic Plus experience here, and that's fine. I don't have to. It's just, that's kind of like fundamentally what I wanted, and that's just the way it goes. But anyways, those are my thoughts on that. Again, I want to make sure, because like I feel like the way that I talk about this content, some people are going to feel like I didn't like it. I loved it. I think the content's fantastic, and I'm still going through the variant dungeons at my own pace, and I think I'll be going through them for quite some time because, like I said, I'm not going to look up guides. I'm just going to like try to figure out the puzzles by myself and try to figure out how this is going to work. But I'm really enjoying the variant part of it. I really enjoyed what I've played of Criterion so far. I can't wait to, you know, beat Criterion, jump into Savage, try that out. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, but it is going to be something in the lines of like, it's going to be a one and done, probably. Or maybe we'll have to do it a couple of times in order to secure the throne or something. But yeah, and then that's going to be it. But anyways, those are just my thoughts on variant, Criterion, as Savage. Let me know what you guys think about it in the comment section down below. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe, bell notification icon, all of that jazz. I'll see you guys later. Have a good one. Peace out, team.